So the ATF's frames and receivers rule was just struck down nationwide, and it was found to be invalid and beyond the ATF's authority. This is huge news, so let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump into this video, if you think the ATF and all of their rules need to be done away with, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Also want to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Lear Capital. Last year was a terrible year for most investors, and 2023 could be even worse with the talks of an upcoming recession. One of the tools you can use to hedge your bets is investing in gold and other precious metals, and you can do that with Lear Capital. With over 25 years of experience in a risk-free 24-hour guarantee where you could review your purchase, Lear Capital is what I recommend if you're interested in looking at gold. So if you're interested, head on over to Lear Capital by using this number, 1-800-920-8388, or you can go to learscholar.com to start purchasing gold right now. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we will be discussing how the ATF's rule on frames and receivers was just struck down by a federal court as entirely invalid. The case we will be talking about is called Vanderstock v. Garland, and it's a case we've been following for a while. And Judge Reed O'Connor just ruled that the frames and receivers rule is in fact invalid and goes beyond the ATF's authority, and this has huge implications nationwide and also has huge implications for other ATF rules like their rules on pistol braces. As you may recall, in this case, Vanderstock, the plaintiffs sued the ATF and sought for a federal court to find that this new rule is invalid under the APA, under the Administrative Procedures Act, and then also the Second Amendment. So there was both a statutory challenge and then also there was a constitutional Second Amendment challenge. In the lawsuit, the plaintiffs also requested a preliminary injunction from the court to enjoin, i.e. halt the enforcement of the ATF's new rule while this case was making its way through the process. Now, originally on review, the federal district court judge Reed O'Connor originally granted a limited preliminary injunction against the ATF. Looking at the ATF's rule on frames and receivers, he found that it was facially invalid under the plain text of the statute and that Congress did not give the ATF authority to create these types of rules and to create this type of regulation on these items. So originally, the district court granted the preliminary injunction in favor of multiple named plaintiffs and then also those intervener plaintiffs in the case. Now, after the ATF lost that preliminary injunction, they decided to appeal that up to the Fifth Circuit. They sought a review of the granting of those injunctions, and that's essentially an interlocutory appeal. And currently, that interlocutory appeal is still pending at the Fifth Circuit level. That fact is also going to become very important later when we talk about what's going to happen with this case going forward, because right now there is still some challenges in this specific case that are pending in the Fifth Circuit, and it's going to play on what happens with the summary judgment motion that was just granted. But like I mentioned, there is a motion for summary judgment, and that is because while this whole issue was being appealed up at the Fifth Circuit, the plaintiffs continued in the lower court with a motion for summary judgment. And we received a judgment from Judge Reed O'Connor. We received his order, and he did exactly that. Judge O'Connor granted the motion for summary judgment in favor of the plaintiffs, FBC included, and he found that the ATF's rule is in fact invalid. Therefore, he vacated the entire rule, so he vacated the rule in its entirety, essentially meaning for now, nationwide, the ATF's frames and receivers rule is no longer valid. In his decision, Judge O'Connor stated that this case presents the question of whether the federal government may lawfully regulate partially manufactured firearm components, related firearms products, and other tools and materials in keeping with the Gun Control Act of 1968. Because the court concludes that the government cannot regulate those items without violating federal law, the court holds that the government's recently enacted final rule, definition of frame or receiver, and identification of firearms is unlawful agency action taken in excess of the ATF's statutory jurisdiction. On this basis, the court vacates the final rule. So the main thrust of his decision is that the ATF acted beyond their authority under the GCA, and therefore the rule in its entirety is in fact invalid. One of the important things to note with this decision is that Judge O'Connor did not rule on the ultimate constitutional question of the final rule, whether or not the final rule violated the Second Amendment. What Judge O'Connor did in this decision is he looked at the text of the GCA and determined whether or not the new rule by the ATF on frames and receivers was consistent with the actual text of the GCA. He decided that no, it's not. He stated in his opinion that Congress carefully defined its terms in the Gun Control Act. The primary definition of firearm in the GCA contains three parts: any weapon, including a starter gun, which 1. Will or to is designed to, or 3 may readily be converted to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive. Under this primary definition, a firearm is first and foremost a weapon. Underscoring that part, Congress explicitly named starter guns in the definition because starter guns are not obviously weapons. Then, because weapon parts also are not weapons, Congress created a secondary definition covering specific weapon parts, the frame or receiver of any such weapon. Notably, Congress did not cover all weapons parts, only frames and receivers, and only the frames and receivers of any such weapon that Congress described in its primary definition. Because Congress did not define frame or receiver, the words receive their ordinary meaning. Contrary to the ATF's assertion, in an interpretive dispute over a statutory term's meaning, the court does not simply leave the precise definition of that term to the discretion and expertise of the ATF. In this section, Judge O'Connor is being very clear that the statute defines what is a frame or receiver expressly, so he's not deferring to the ATF's interpretation. He also then goes on to completely destroy the ATF's position when he states in the opinion that, as the court previously explained, the issue in this case is whether an ATF may properly regulate a component as a frame or receiver, even after the ATF determines that the component in question is not a frame or receiver. It may not. Logic dictates that a part cannot be both not yet a receiver and a receiver at the same time. Defendants' reliance on that logical contradiction is fatal to their argument. Judge O'Connor also found that under the text of the GCA, a weapons part kit can also never be considered to be a firearm. For the ATF to claim that it is goes beyond the statute's express language and goes beyond what authority the ATF actually has. And since this rule is invalid in its entirety, Judge O'Connor ruled to vacate it altogether. He also decided against vacating the rule only to the specific named plaintiffs. He stated to vacate only to the named plaintiffs would make the relief look more like a preliminary injunction, which of course he already granted, and also would not actually meet the type of relief that the plaintiffs want. So he found that a limited vacature in scope only to the plaintiffs was not appropriate. So you may be asking, what does this mean? Well, Judge O'Connor vacated the ATF's frames and receivers rule in its entirety and found it entirely invalid. He found that the rule was not consistent with the language of the GCA, and therefore the ATF exceeded their statutory authority. As a result, the rule is vacated in its entirety and it's vacated nationwide, so it's not limited in scope. So, like I said, this is a huge win. It's another huge loss for the ATF, and once again, another rule by the ATF has been found completely invalid. Now, I do want to mention that no doubt in my mind at all, the ATF will file an appeal up to the 5th Circuit and seek a review of this decision by the 5th Circuit. They already have appealed the injunction that was granted by Judge O'Connor. I suspect that the summary judgment appeal will likely be consolidated with that, and likely their appeal on the injunction will be mooted, and so it'll proceed mainly forward on a summary judgment appeal. But in all reality, the 5th Circuit has been very pro 2A. They've been very much in our favor when it comes to these ATF rules. You may remember that the 5th Circuit en banc panel recently ruled against the ATF's rule on bump stocks in the Cargill case. Right now, they just heard a hearing on the pistol brace rule in the Mock v. Garland case, and my listening to that indicated that they were probably going to rule in our favor also in the pistol brace rule. So I think the ATF is really in a bad spot, especially in this case when they just had a summary judgment issued against them and the entire rule on frames and receivers was vacated. So really interesting. We're going to see how this develops from here. Make sure you share this video around, share this good news that the ATF's rule on frames and receivers was found completely invalid, that they overstepped their authority. Again, really good news. Make sure you share this, and if I get any more information, I will let you all know. Also, if you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of 2A news. As always, I want to thank everybody who likes, comments, subscribes, who hits the notification bell, who shares these videos. You guys are directly impacting these videos, impacting this channel, and helping me to reach and educate more people than I could ever do on my own. So as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And don't forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.